The village of Greyabbey lies about halfway down the Ards Peninsula on the shores of Strangford Lough. This small village is so named for its Cistercian abbey of the same name, which was an active place of worship for over 400 years, but now stands in ruins. The site is one of the most impressive examples of early Gothic architecture in Ireland. Greyabbey's real name is Santa Maria Lugum Dei, or the Yoke of God. It was commissioned by the wife of Anglo-Norman warlord John de Courcy, Affreca. She was on a return voyage from the Isle of Man back to Northern Ireland after visiting her father, Godfred Olafsson, King of the Isles. Her ship was caught in a terrible storm, and she prayed to God that if she were delivered safely, she would build a house of thanksgiving. She was delivered safely, and Affreca kept her promise, building what the locals call Greyabbey because of the colouring of the Cistercian habits. Greyabbey was dissolved in 1541 by Henry VIII, but remained in fairly good condition until the building's roof was burnt by an Irish chieftain of the O'Neill clan, so that the English couldn't use it as a fortified position in his territory. In the early 17th century, Greyabbey and the surrounding lands were granted to the Montgomerys, one of the original Ulster Scots planter families. In the subsequent centuries, the remains of the abbey suffered weathering, vandalism, and theft. Many of the abbey's original stones have been used in the construction of various other buildings in the surrounding area, including the parish church. While the many monks who worshipped in Greyabbey and Affreca, its founder, have long since passed on, there have been accounts of apparitions in the area, most prominently the White Lady. She has been cited numerous times by locals over the years and is assumed to be the spirit of Affreca. A high-status female burial was discovered in the nave of Greyabbey, and it has long since been assumed that this was the grave of Affreca. However, today only the stone lid of the coffin remains on the site, and the whereabouts of her actual remains are unknown. Besides the White Lady, there have been a few scattered reports of phantom monks, as well as apparitions from other intervening periods of history, including 3 Victorian ladies dressed in petticoats. It's an ancient building with a rich and vibrant history, so of course, I had to investigate.
So the reason that the high altar was to the east and the monks were buried facing the east was they believed the second coming would be from Jerusalem in the east. So this is the main part of the church. The rest of the abbey had a west wing and an east wing. The west wing is totally gone, but you can actually make out the door there of where the west wing was. At its heyday, there were probably 50 monks here, about 15 choir brothers, and about 35 lay brothers. The lay brothers were illiterate, and they couldn't speak Latin, and they did most of the heavy work. When the last abbot left, John Cassels, in 1541, the abbey lay empty until 1572, when the local Irish chieftain, Sir Brian McPhelan O'Neill of the O'Neill clan, burnt the roof. He burnt the roof to stop the English using it as a fortified position on his territory. So you're now actually walking on or beside bodies of the Montgomerys. And one of the Montgomerys in Dublin, who related to this family here, obviously, cousins, he bought a commission in the British Army in around 1760. And he went to America. He was sent to America to fight in the French Indian Wars. So you think lost on Mohicans here. So the abbot would have sat here during High Mass, which could have lasted an hour, or maybe up to 3 hours. And the abbots were old men, and they would have fallen asleep. And very often they fell off their chair. And we believe that gives us the idiom in English of dropping off or falling off to sleep. They literally fell off their chair. Here is where We've seen the 1874 archaeological study of the monastery, the very first one that was ever done in 1874, and it shows wall tombs in there.
And this is where
And
you took that. The photograph was taken, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Rough, literally there.
Photograph of those was taken there, wall tombs there. The funny thing was, I saw the photograph of the ghost about 2 weeks before I knew there were wall tombs in there. As I said, this is the part that wasn't re-roofed as the Church of Ireland, so there are no burial slabs here. This is the old Catholic part of the monastery. So that's a gravestone. It's an ecclesiastical coffin lid made of stone. It comes from Greyabbey, about 2.5 miles up the road. There's nothing left above ground at Greyabbey, but that is a coffin lid. And that is a high status, what we call a high status burial. Okay. The reason we call it a high status burial is the person who owned that coffin was rich. To buy that in those days would have been the equivalent of a yacht today. The ordinary people out there could never. Medieval mind had 3 states after death. You had heaven, from which you wouldn't want to return. You had hell, from which you couldn't return. And in between, you had a place called purgatory. And that was for people who weren't bad enough to go to hell, but not good enough to go to heaven. A lot of the high status people here get buried here because they donated to the monks money to pray for their souls, because they believed that speeded up the transition from purgatory to heaven. This is the chapter house. What was the purpose of the chapter house? The chapter house was, if you had 50 monks in here in a enclosed community, these were not like Augustinians or Benedictines or Franciscans. They retreated from the world. There's no infirmary on this site and there's no school on this site. Their whole idea was to retreat from society. But when you've got confined to that space, you rub people up the wrong way. 50 men in the one enclosed space, you have to have a way of dealing with that to live in harmony. The chapter house was how they dealt with it. If Brother Frederick had taken 2 more spoonfuls of honey for breakfast than he should have, he had to own up in here. The Cistercians were not a silent order, but this is the one room where they were not allowed to speak. They listened to scripture and they had. You'll notice there's another little arch here at ground level. And the story of the little arches is very simple. The Romans never came to Ireland, but Roman technology did. So there was a cistern on the hill up there, and you'll notice it's on a slight slant, this part of the monastery. It was fed by a well on the other side of the hedge. The hedge was not there. The well's still there, but the cistern is gone.
I feel like I can hear something. Hello, my name's Edward King Thompson, and I thought I would do a little bit of something different for the conclusion today. Thought it'd be nice to show my face at 100 subscribers, and thank you to all my supporters so far. So the investigation of Greyabbey was a very interesting one. It's a lovely, peaceful place, to be honest. Probably one of the most peaceful places I've ever been to. To be honest with you, I didn't really see or hear or capture any evidence of anything supernatural at all. That's not to say that the claims of ghosts such as the Grey Lady and of the monks are false. It's just I personally didn't experience any of that. Ray Murray, the local historian who kindly took us round, put it really well when he said that, if there's any correlation between the amount of death and suffering per square inch to paranormal activity in an area, it would make sense that this area is very quiet and very peaceful, and that you get a good vibe from being there. The example that he used was walking into the Colosseum in Rome, and that it was just like walking on treacle. I've been there myself, and certainly I felt that the atmosphere was just ultimately thicker and heavier. Goodness knows whether there's any scientific logic in that at all, but it's certainly an interesting thing that maybe some part of our sixth sense, as it were, is able to detect suffering or this kind of traumatic energy in an area. But with 500 years of Gregorian chants, peace, harmony, living amongst nature, gardening, worship, perhaps it's not surprising that it just feels like a peaceful place. Onto the ghost photo that was shared to me by Ray. It's a difficult one for me because with my knowledge of filmmaking and digital camera technology, I know that is a lens flare. I mean, that's what it is. The sun is in the upper right corner. It's, bouncing off the camera. It's creating that green kind of shape down the bottom. But I guess it depends on your attitude towards paranormal phenomenon, how much of the universe is able to be affected by supernatural things or things beyond our understanding. Because sure, I know that scientifically that is the explanation, but as Ray put it so very well, there are so many coincidences coming together to create that photo in the spot it was. So Ray actually saw the photograph of the monk before he knew that there were wall tombs in that area, as you heard in the explanation of the video. And if you look at the monk, it looks like it's sitting and kneeling where a monk should have been kneeling 500, 600 years ago when that building was a fully functioning abbey. And on top of that, if you look closely, you can see what looks like a kind of pointed cowl there. Yeah, so I guess really it comes down to your thoughts about how much the supernatural can influence the natural processes of the world. We get into a very different argument about all kinds of belief at that point. And finally, onto the point of Affreca, the White Lady herself. As with everything else here, I recorded, saw, heard absolutely no evidence of her. I do wonder if there is a correlation between the fact that her coffin, the main body of it, disappeared many years ago. Even the coffin lid slab, which I pointed out in the video, used to sit in that little alcove, is now in the community centre off to the side. I wonder if there is a correlation there as to why she isn't seen so much anymore. But then again, her spectre is most often seen at the other end of the abbey to where that coffin is, so perhaps there's no correlation there at all, and perhaps she just didn't show up for us tonight. Well, it's been a lovely investigation of a peaceful and tranquil area. There was no evidence captured, which is why I'm kind of doing this video a little bit differently, and I think from the very beginning I had wanted to focus on the history, the folklore, and preserving these special little places that are not often talked about and would very easily just get swept away in the sands of time if it wasn't for people like myself. There are lots of other great channels that do stuff like this, these stories. So I really hope that you've enjoyed today's video. If so, please give it a like and subscribe. I'm really trying to grow this channel. I have lots of stories I want to share. And thank you very much for watching. I hope to see you soon.